Have you ever felt like you were being pushed into the corner of your own home? As if your presence annoyed others, as if your story no longer mattered. Have you ever witnessed someone who, instead of shouting or fighting back, responded with such a firm silence that it changed everything around them? Today's story is about respect. About a woman who spent her whole life cultivating memories in a home built with love and who, faced with a cold, humiliating phrase, realized they had stopped seeing her as part of it. What she did next wasn't out of anger, it was out of dignity. If you've ever swallowed your words to keep the peace, or if you've ever felt like they were slowly erasing you, perhaps this story will help you rethink the place you occupy and what you still have time to reclaim. Stay with me. My name is Elvira Salinas. I'm 74 years old, and for much of my life I was a literature teacher at a secondary school in the Buenos Aires countryside. I married very young to Julian, an architect with steady hands and gentle ideas, who designed the house where I lived for more than 40 years. It was a classical-style mansion, with arched windows and a magnolia garden that he himself planted when we learned our first child was on the way. After he died, 9 years ago, the house became too big for me, but I could never bring myself to leave it. Every corner held his voice, my children's laughter, even the echo of the silences we shared. My hip fracture happened in April of last year, a silly fall in the hallway when I hurried to turn off the oven. I was alone. As usual, I lay on the floor for hours until my neighbor, Mrs. Ramira, suspected something was wrong and came in through the back door. It was the first time in a long while that I truly felt vulnerable. After the surgery, Andres, my youngest son, came to visit with his wife, Camila. They were worried, saying it would be risky for me to keep living alone in that two-story house. Andres suggested they move in temporarily to help with my recovery. At first, I thought it would be good. The silence of the house weighed on me at times, especially at dawn. And I confess, deep down, the idea of having my son close warmed me. I accepted. The proposal was simple. I would stay in the ground floor guest room, more accessible, and they would occupy the upper floor. I thought it fair. But soon I realized that what I had imagined as companionship and care would become something suffocating. Camila always had a direct, almost harsh manner. She never treated me badly, but there was something in her look that made me feel tolerated, not loved. In less than 2 weeks, she began moving the furniture around. She took down the pictures on the walls, those that Julian had hung with such care, and sent some outdated items for donation without even asking me. I didn't complain. I've never been good at confrontation. I simply began to feel the house shrinking around me. Meals grew silent. Andres buried himself in his phone, and Camila sighed loudly, as if living there was a burden. Once, I overheard her on the phone saying the house was beautiful on the outside, but smelled of old age on the inside. Those words scraped me inside, but I swallowed them. Maybe she was right. Maybe I myself already smelled of the past. I kept trying to be discreet. I spent most of my time in my room, reading or organizing my things. I didn't want to bother anyone. My only routine was watering the magnolias, even in pain, and making tea at dusk. It was my way of resisting, I guess, of keeping alive the part of the house that still belonged to me. But even these small gestures began to be seen as quirks. One day Camila let slip that I was stuck in time. I smiled, as one does when thanked for an insult. Then came Sunday, one of those warm Sundays when the world seems paused. We were having breakfast together, more out of obligation than desire. Camila got up from the table, went to my room to fetch the vacuum, and upon returning stopped at the door, looked at Andres, and said without ceremony, "Your room stinks." And then she walked on, as if commenting on the weather. Andres said nothing. He didn't even look up. And I simply took a deep breath. I looked out the window where the sun shone on the magnolia leaves, and I smiled. But it was not a smile of peace. It was the kind of smile that emerges when something inside you finally breaks. I didn't say a word, but at that moment, I decided that that would be the last Sunday in that house. Not because I wanted to leave, but because there I no longer existed. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in the armchair by the bed, wearing a shawl around my shoulders, my heart pounding as if anticipating something big. Every detail of the house spoke to me: the creak of the floorboards, the tick-tock of the old clock, even the smell of the furniture varnish that Julian applied every autumn. I spent hours remembering the first time I entered that house with him, still young, carrying boxes and dreams. Now I was there, invisible in my own home. The next morning, they left early for a 3-day trip. Andre stopped by my door and said, "If you need anything, just call me, okay?" In that automatic voice of someone who already knows nothing important will be said. Camilla didn't even say goodbye. The car sped off. As soon as I heard the gate slam, I went to the kitchen, made a strong coffee, and called the number I'd kept in the back of my address book for years: Martinez and Lobo Real Estate Law and Consulting. I spoke with Mr. Julian Lobo, who had been my husband's friend. He answered kindly, surprised. As if rediscovering a forgotten name, I didn't need to explain much. I simply said, "I want to sell the house," confidentially. And quickly, he fell silent for a few seconds before responding, "Can you meet me in an hour?" I said yes, and for the first time in months, I felt my spine straighten. While I waited, I took a bath, put on my navy blue dress, the one I wore on wedding anniversaries, and dried my hair calmly. I wanted to be clear-headed, firm, present. I went down to the living room with the folder of documents I had organized myself after Julian's death. Nothing gave me more security than seeing everything labeled: deed, property tax receipt, certificates. I might be old, but I was never careless. When Mr. Lobo arrived, he stood in silence for a few minutes, simply observing the house. "Everything's the same." He murmured. I agreed. I explained that I wanted to sell without brokers' visits, without signs, without ads. Only serious, discreet buyers. He said he knew to such profiles. One was a woman looking to transform it into a cultural center. The other was a newly retired doctor couple. He said he'd have answers in 2 days, and he returned. During that time, I maintained my routine as if nothing were happening. Camilla sent me a message asking if I'd eaten properly. I replied yes. Andre's center. Photo of a restaurant. Funny how appearances persist even when everything is already decided. I felt light, as if carrying a great but fair secret. I wasn't running away. I was simply leaving before they erased what remained of me. On Wednesday, Lobo came back. He brought both couples to view the house at separate times. They were both enchanted. The doctor cried on the veranda. The cultural center woman asked if she could keep the magnolias. I smiled and said yes. I closed the deal with her. The contract would be signed on Friday, and the move would happen in 7 days. The price? Fair. I wasn't selling a house. I was selling time, a piece of my history that deserved someone who knew how to listen to walls. When I signed the papers, I felt no guilt. I felt relief. So many people spend their whole lives waiting for a grand gesture of courage. Mine came in silence, in the stroke of a pen, with the smell of the old office and light streaming through the blinds. I left with a copy of the contract, a list of documents, and one certainty: I was alive. And I could still choose. I walked home slowly, as if feeling each tile bid me farewell. Upon entering, I looked around as though for the last time. I ran my fingers over the frame of the living room mirror, the one Julian brought from a trip to Chile. I opened the kitchen cabinet just to see the cups I received on my 60th birthday. Everything smelled of story, even the things Camilla disliked. In a way, that comforted me. She never understood that the value wasn't in the object, but in what it silently held. In the following days, I packed my things calmly. I chose only the essentials: my favorite clothes, my books with notes in the margins, the picture frames with faded photos, the shawl embroidered by my mother. The rest I left boxed with labels for the new owner to decide their fate. I didn't want to carry ghosts, only living memories. I decided to move to a smaller town, 2 hours away, a place where nobody knew me, where I could walk the streets without the weight of who I used to be. I found a simple apartment with a balcony and a small bookshelf in the living room. That was enough. I only needed natural light, a teapot, and space to breathe. I reserved it before even telling Andres. In fact, I didn't plan on telling him at all. I was just going to leave a letter. On Thursday night, I began to write it. I sat at the desk with a thick sheet of paper and my blue ink pen. The words came slowly, but Firmly, there was no anger, no irony, only an old weariness and a sincere desire to move on. I wrote that love shouldn't hurt like this, that respect is non-negotiable, and that, as much as I love them, it was time to love myself too. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the bed alongside a copy of the deed. On Friday at 8 o'clock in the morning, they returned from their trip. I was already packed, sitting in the living room with a cup of tea in my hands. Camilla came in first. Seeing me there, composed and calm, she furrowed her brow. "You're leaving?" she asked in a dry voice. I looked at her tenderly. Yes, but this time, not to return. Andres arrived moments later, his face drawn from travel. When he saw the suitcases, he seemed to finally realize something was different. I explained everything in a low voice, that the house had been sold, that the new owner would take possession in 7 days, that I was moving and would leave the letter with details. Andres didn't know what to say. He stood there, frozen, as if he couldn't understand the language he'd just heard. Camilla, on the other hand, began firing sharp questions, trying to understand how, when, by what right, but I gave no space. I only said, by the same right as the one who built this house with her own hands. They accused me of being impulsive, said I was being extreme, that it wasn't necessary. But what they didn't know was that I had stopped living in that house long before the sale. My body was still there, but my soul had been pushed into a corner along with the swapped furniture and portraits. Sometimes you don't have to slam the door to leave. You just have to stop existing in a place. When the taxi arrived, I took my bags, breathed deeply, and looked at the garden one last time. The magnolias were in bloom. As if bidding me farewell, I got into the car without looking back. As the gate closed behind us, I realized what hurt me wasn't the separation, but the time it took me to understand that love without respect turns into prison. And that even at 74, it's still possible to free yourself. The new apartment was on the second floor of a small building with a beige facade and flower boxes under the windows. The first thing I did upon arriving was open all the curtains. Light flooded in, revealing the lightwood floor and the soft smell of fresh paint. It was small, but it was mine not by inheritance, not by anyone's convenience. It was mine because I chose it, fully aware, for the first time in a long while. That night, I slept on a mattress without a bed frame, but with a horror as light as I hadn't felt in years. In the days that followed, I began to set up my new home with care. I went to the market to buy flowers, discovered a neighborhood bookstore where I spent hours talking with the owner, a raspy-voiced gentleman with a poet's soul, and even enrolled in a beginner's painting class. I, who spent my life teaching words, now wanted to express myself with color, and each brushstroke seemed to untie an old knot inside me. Sometimes I'd sit on the balcony and remember Andres as a child, running through the garden with dirt-smudged hands and a wide smile. It was inevitable to think about what we lost along the way. But I didn't want to nurture resentments. I just wanted to learn to live with memory without letting it pull me back. Writing became a kind of silent prayer. I jotted down phrases, memories, even old recipes, everything that helped me inhabit the present with presence. 2 weeks after the move, I received Andres's first call. I answered calmly. On the other end, he sounded hesitant. He said he was surprised, sad, and needed to understand. I told him he had every right to feel whatever he wanted, but that I also had the right not to erase myself. He was silent. He asked if he could visit. I said yes, but that if he came, he should come as a son, not as a resentful tenant. Camilla didn't call. No message, no sign, and, truthfully, I didn't expect her to. Some people prefer to keep their distance from those they can no longer control. I ceased to be convenient the moment I rose from that breakfast table and chose dignity over dust. I don't hate her. I only hope that someday she understands what it means to live in a house that carries someone's soul. I welcomed Andres one Saturday afternoon. I brought sunflowers, my favorite, and a look of guilt on his face. We spoke little, we cried a bit too. He told me he never imagined I was so suffocated. I said he never wanted to imagine. And that, too, hurt. He nodded and apologized. I made no drama, I simply accepted. Forgiveness, when it's real, comes without spectacle. After that day, we began to talk more often, carefully, as if feeling our way in the dark. I didn't see him in person for a while. I preferred the distance needed to heal the parts he hadn't seen, but it was a start. And sometimes the truest new beginning springs from a deep cut, Andres. Never spoke of Camila again, and I never asked. Some conversations don't need to happen for us to understand everything. Months later, I sat before the mirror and noticed my own hands, wrinkled, thin, but steady. I remembered they were the hands that taught students, gathered flowers, cradled children and signed the deed of a decision no one else had dared take for me. For the first time in years, I looked at myself and thought, I'm still here. And I'm whole. My routine in the new town became like a gentle tide. I woke early, boiled water, and sat on the balcony with a notebook in my lap. I wrote about what I saw, a lazy dog crossing the street, a neighbor watering plants with a dreamy expression, the church bells ringing at noon. All of it was simple, but it gave me back something I had long lost, presence. I was, at last, present in my own life. Nights no longer hurt like before. Sleeping alone wasn't a sentence anymore. It was a space of peace. I still dreamed of Julian sometimes. Gentle dreams, as if he passed by just to check on me, and I was well. I felt he would approve each decision I'd made, especially because he always said, being firm isn't lack of love. It's love for oneself. Over time, I met other women in the painting class. One of them, Beatrice, was 69 with a boisterous laugh that made me cry with laughter. She painted crooked trees and said that was the portrait of our generation, strong even after being bent by storms. We began meeting outside class for tea, talking about life, disappointments, and long-held desires. We formed a small, unnamed group, united by having given up something vital to reclaim our own peace. We laughed a lot, sometimes we cried, but above all, we listened to each other, something rare in today's fast world. One afternoon, I received a letter from Teresa, the new mansion owner. She thanked me for trusting her with that space. She wrote that she had kept the magnolias, the stained glass, and even some furniture that told stories without uttering a word. She wrote, I feel the presence of love in every corner. I cried reading it. Because I realized that even after my departure, the house remained a home only now for someone who treated it reverently. That letter gave me peace more than I expected. Knowing the story built there hadn't been erased, only continued, felt like receiving back something I thought lost. I kept the letter in my bedside drawer, alongside an old handkerchief of Julian's and a bookmark Andres gave me as a child. Some things can't be explained, they just feel like they belong to who we are. Months passed without seeing Andres. Then one day he showed up unexpectedly on my birthday. He brought a simple homemade cake and a book of Neruda poems. He hugged me longer than usual. And there, in the silence of that gesture, I felt something shift in him. I didn't need to say anything. I simply put the kettle on, letting his presence speak for itself. We spoke little, but truthfully, he told me he'd thought a lot about what happened. That at first, he was hurt, but that now he understood and admired my decision. It moved me not for validation, but because, for the first time, he saw me as a whole woman. Not only as the mother who always waited in silence, but as someone capable of saying enough without shouting. And that, for me, was the most beautiful gift he could give. Some days after that visit, I reflected on how relationships transform when we change from within. I didn't expect Andres to come back or say those things. But maybe when a mother respects herself, she teaches her children even belatedly to do the same. And I learned that with pain, but also with dignity. It felt like crossing a bridge I'd thought I didn't deserve to cross. I began writing about everything, not to publish or show anyone, but simply to record. The first line in my new notebook was, "Silent women also scream only in a different language." Writing was my way of translating that language, and with each page, I felt more in control of myself. It was like gathering pieces that life had scattered and finally assembling a more complete image of who I'd always been. With Camila, there was no reconciliation, no attempt. And that, contrary to what many might expect, didn't hurt me. Because I learned some absences aren't losses, they're reliefs. Sometimes healing lies precisely in accepting that not every tie needs rescuing. Some must be left where they fell. And that's okay. I didn't become bitter. I became fair to myself. I continued life with new rituals, Sunday market strolls, tea afternoons with Beatrice and other women in their own new chapters. We formed a small, unnamed circle, sharing the experience of having given up something important to reclaim peace. We laughed, sometimes cried, but above all, we listened to rare commodity these days. Painting became part of my routine. I started with flowers, then moved to doors, open doors, closed doors. Ajar doors. When the teacher asked why, I replied, because I spent much of my life standing before doors no one opened for me. Now I paint them myself, she smiled, and I felt something inside me truly transforming. Over time, I stopped checking my phone for messages, not from resentment, but from freedom. Life back at the mansion felt like an old book on a high shelf. I could revisit it if I wanted, but I no longer needed to reread it. Each page had served its purpose, and I was, finally, writing a new chapter. One cloudy afternoon, I sat on the balcony under a blanket and listened to the rain on the roof. It was a long, lazy rain, and there, alone and at peace, I thought, if someone asked me whether I regretted anything, my answer would be simple yes, waiting so long to choose myself, but never for what I did once I finally stood up. At 74, I had learned to rise without making noise and also to leave with elegance, even when everything begged me to stay. I didn't want to prove anything to anyone. I simply wanted, truly, to spend my remaining years with a clear soul. And in this new home, with walls free of history yet full of possibility, I could finally breathe without apologizing for occupying space. One March afternoon, I decided to visit the city's botanical garden. A silent place, full of stone paths and trees with informational plaques that seemed to whisper stories to the breeze. I walked slowly among the palms and old iron benches, feeling a kind of longing that wasn't for anyone in particular, it was for myself, for a version long forgotten. There, amidst that green, I realized I no longer felt out of place. For the first time in years, I was exactly where I wanted to be. I bought a magnolia sapling small, still fragile, but with buds promising flowers. I planted it in a larger part on the balcony and spoke to it as one does with an old friend. The magnolia symbolized all that had endured, all that flourishes even in hard soil. It was like bringing a piece of the old house, but in another form smaller, yet free. Caring for it became a ritual, and deep down, I knew I was caring for myself too. Sometimes, when its leaves rustled in the wind, I imagined Julian there in the armchair beside me, making his discreet comments, adjusting his glasses, smiling with his eyes. He always said I was stronger than I seemed. At the time, I didn't believe him, but now I understood. Strength, after all, doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it simply needs silence to bloom. I continued writing, painting, walking. I met a gentleman named Ricardo, also a widower, who loved classic films and made sure to buy fresh bread every morning. We talked freely, like old acquaintances, no rush, no expectations, just presence. Sometimes we had coffee after the market. Other times, we exchanged books, nothing more. But it reminded me that life, even after so much, can still offer sweet little encounters. I never returned to the mansion, not out of bitterness, but out of respect for what I lived there. Sometimes someone told me the house now hosts cultural events, art workshops, children's reading sessions. That made me happy, to think that a space that once suffocated me now inspires others. Felt like closing a cycle with gratitude, because not everything that hurts us needs to be forgotten. Sometimes it just needs a new purpose, a new tone, a new time. With each passing month, I realized time hadn't stolen my youth, it simply taught me to use it differently. My wrinkles, once a source of discomfort, now seemed like a map. Each one told a story. And I no longer wanted to hide any of them, because those stories brought me here. Taught me that love without listening is an empty presence. And that silence can also be a meaningful choice. My renewed bond with Andres became more frequent now, without guilt, without burdens. He visited me occasionally, told me about work, about life. We avoided the past, but there was between us a silent Understanding, as if both of us knew everything had changed us forever. And perhaps that's how true bonds are. They don't break, but transform when we learn to love ourselves before pleasing others. I was even invited to give a small talk at the local school about literature and memory. I accepted. I spoke calmly, with the cadence of a teacher I once was. At the end, a curly-haired girl told me, "You speak as if you know books from the inside." I smiled and replied, "Maybe because I've lived some of them in my own flesh." The classroom laughed. And at that moment, I felt life calling me not with shouts, but with delicacy. The following months passed slowly like a long summer afternoon. There was something beautiful about that slowness. It taught me to pay attention to the sound of wine, the taste of tea, the warmth of pottery in my hands. I never imagined silence, which once felt like punishment, could become a refuge. It was as if I were relearning to live now at my own pace, in my own rhythm, without anyone trying to speed up or silence my steps. One day, I saw a lady much like me sitting alone on a plaza bench. She stared at the ground, clutching a crumpled envelope. I felt compelled to sit next to her, and I did. We said nothing for a few minutes, then she turned and said, "He left me today." After 42 years, I looked into her eyes and could only say, "You still have yourself. And that's more than it seems," she cried. I did too. Sometimes all we need is someone to say surviving is possible. Moments like that reminded me how life is circular. One day I was the broken woman, another, I was the one holding someone's hand. That silent exchange between wounds and strength made me realize no story is too small to be told, and no decision made with self-love is weak. In fact, those are the strongest because they demand we break with what we were taught to accept in silence. I received another note from Teresa, the mansion's new occupant. She wrote that now neighborhood children come to hear stories on the old living room floor. That they'd kept my bookshelf, the stained glass, even rehung the painting Camila removed. She wrote as someone who cares, who repairs. And that moved me in ways I couldn't explain. It was as if my home had finally found someone who listened. One morning, I woke to light streaming through the curtains and noticed something curious. I missed nothing. Neither the house, nor the old routine, nor the clothes I'd left behind. It was as if everything had truly been left behind, not only physically, but emotionally. And that wasn't emptiness, it was space. Space for new scents, new rituals, new silences. Ricardo, the man from the market, began joining me on walks. He was kind, spoke little, and seemed to respect time's pace. One day, he brought me a handmade bookmark with pressed leaves. "For your books," he said. I thanked him with a smile. We were nothing, neither close friends nor aspiring lovers, but there was a calm care between us, and sometimes that's all one needs after so much noise. Peace. Beatrice, my friend with the crooked trees, used to say we only truly age when we stop wanting to discover. And I wanted to keep discovering not necessarily places, but parts of myself long asleep. I read more poetry, listened to old songs, tried new recipes. It was a slow rebirth, but full of colour, and it made me feel alive with a serene intensity. Little by little, I realised my greatest lesson wasn't selling the house or confronting Camila. It was something more subtle. I learned not to explain myself, not to justify every choice, every silence, every act of self-care. True freedom, in the end, begins when you understand you no longer need anyone's permission to be who you are. A few weeks after our last meeting, I received a letter from Andres. It was short, handwritten like in the old days. He said he was thinking of moving cities, that Camila had asked for space, and that maybe that was best for both of them. He said he'd been reading a lot, reflecting on the choices he made and those he didn't. At the end he wrote, "I hope one day to have the courage you had. Mom, thank you for showing me it's never too late." I kept the letter in its envelope not out of attachment, but out of respect. Some words deserve rest. In the new town, I gained familiar faces. The bakery girl already knew my order. The postman called me by name. Neighborhood children smiled when they saw me on the balcony. That familiarity, once reserved for dusty walls and old photographs, now belonged to living people. It wasn't just about rebuilding, it was about starting anew with meaning. One day Beatrice invited me to a group art exhibition. Our paintings hung side by side, mine, a half-open red door with light escaping beneath. Hers, a flowering crook tree. When I saw my work on that white wall among so many others, I was moved. It was more than paint, it was my story, laid bare. And for the first time, I felt proud of what I'd overcome and of what I'd dared to leave behind. I never returned to teaching in a classroom, but I accepted an invitation to mentor a group of young readers at the local library. At each meeting, we talked about books and about life. They listened as one listens to someone who's fallen, made mistakes, but carried on. And I listened to them with that wonderful astonishment one feels when recognizing oneself in another generation. It was as if, by sharing my story, I helped other women even younger to choose themselves sooner. During one of those gatherings, a girl asked if I'd ever regretted a major decision. I took a deep breath and answered sincerely, I regretted waiting so long. But never what I did once I finally stood up. She smiled, and in that smile, I saw something I'd seldom known, freedom planted early. My courage may have come late, but perhaps it will help others bloom sooner. I still dream of the house sometimes with its colored glass, its magnolia scent. But in those dreams, it no longer weighs on me. It watches me, as if to say, you did what you needed. I feel no anger now, no longing for what was. Only gratitude for what shaped me, the woman I was, the woman I ceased to be, and, above all, the woman I've become. The other day, Ricardo invited me to visit a museum in a neighboring town. I accepted without fear, without plans, only with the curiosity of someone who still has much to discover. On the way, he looked at me and said, "You have the eyes of someone who's lived many lives," and I smiled, because it's true. Within me live all the Elviras that ever were, the one who stayed silent, the one who waited, the one who gave in. But above all, the one who chose herself. And it's with this version that I want to move forward, no matter how much time I've left. Because, in the end, it's not about how many years we have, it's about what we do with them once we finally stop asking permission to be who we are. And me, I am living with silence, with firmness, with peace. Today, as I write these lines, the magnolia on my balcony has bloomed for the first time. 3 white flowers, opened wide as if smiling at the sun. I watched them for a long while, cup in hand, feeling a quiet joy. And then I realized, those flowers are living proof that life always begins anew even when it seems too late. After so much silence, so much weariness. I was never one for shouting. I've always preferred delicacy, deliberate gestures, carefully chosen words, but inside, I carried storms no one ever saw. And it was only now, at this stage of life, that I understood my strength was never the absence of pain, it was the constant choice to continue even when the world tried to erase me slowly. Selling the house was just a symbol, the real change happened within me. When I decided I would no longer accept crumbs disguised as care. When I stopped justifying disrespect in the name of love. When I ceased to believe that old age meant invisibility, I made myself seen. I made myself heard without raising my voice. Many women write to me today. Some young, others like me with silver hair and bodies marked by time. They say they read my story, recognize themselves, cried. Some still live in their silent mansions, with children, daughters-in-law, husbands, or even alone, but all carrying the same dilemma, to stay out of loyalty, or to leave out of self-love. And I reply only with what I lived, that leaving is never abandonment. When it's out of respect for oneself, I, Elvira Salinas, now live in a small place where every corner belongs to me. Where no one invades my space or questions my silences. Where my decisions need no negotiation. I don't have everything, but I have peace. And that is worth more than any inheritance, any tradition, any external expectation. I never imagined that at 74 I would still have time to start over. But I did, and if you're reading this, afraid to take a step, perhaps the time is now. Don't wait for the world to apologize. Don't wait for someone to save you. Sometimes salvation is a suitcase, a signature, a door closing behind you and another opening before your courage. Because, in the end, the greatest home we'll ever live in is within ourselves. And if that home is at peace, the rest is just geography. Today, I sleep peacefully, head on the pillow, heart light, with one certainty no one can take from me. I didn't leave my house. I came back to myself. Sometimes what hurts most isn't what they take from us, but the time it takes us to understand we deserve more. If you stayed with me until now, perhaps you've felt something similar at some point, the feeling of being present but unseen, of occupying a space that no longer belongs to you. Tell me, if you like. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to respect yourself? Have you ever felt it was time to leave, even with a heavy heart? These stories aren't always told aloud, but they live in many people out there, and maybe yours is waiting for the right moment to step out of silence. If this story touched you in some way, share it with someone who deserves to hear it. Sometimes all we need is to know we're not alone, that others also found courage where there seemed only weariness. And if you want to follow more real stories like this one, stay here with us. There's still so much to be said with truth, with respect, and always with an open heart.